The day my uncle died, I inherited a farmhouse I'd never wanted and a mystery I couldn't ignore. I'm David Carter, 47 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was living a comfortable life in Chicago working construction management. I hadn't been back to rural Iowa in 20 years. The farmhouse sat on 80 acres outside a town called Millbrook, population 800, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. My Uncle Frank had lived there alone for 30 years after my aunt passed. He was my father's older brother, a quiet man who kept to himself. We'd exchanged Christmas cards, but little else. When the lawyer called to tell me Frank had died of a heart attack and left me everything, I was shocked. I had cousins who'd stayed closer. Why me? The lawyer said Frank had been specific. The property, the house, and all contents were to go to David Carter and no one else. There was a single condition in the will that seemed strange. I had to live in the house for at least 3 months before I could sell it. If I didn't, everything would go to the state. It felt like manipulation from beyond the grave, but curiosity got the better of me. I took a leave of absence from my job, packed a bag, and drove the 5 hours to Millbrook. When I pulled up the long gravel driveway that April afternoon, my heart sank. The farmhouse was worse than I'd imagined. A 2-story structure that had probably been beautiful once, it now sagged with neglect. The white paint had peeled away to gray wood underneath. The porch steps were rotted through in places. Several windows were cracked. The barn behind the house had partially collapsed. Weeds had taken over what must have once been a garden. It looked like a place where hope had died slowly. I sat in my truck for a long moment, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Then I grabbed my bag and walked up those treacherous porch steps. The key the lawyer had given me stuck in the lock. When I finally got the door open, the smell hit me immediately. Dust, mildew, and something else. Not rot exactly, just age, sadness. The interior was dark even in the afternoon light. Heavy curtains covered the windows. I flicked a light switch. Nothing. The power had been shut off. I pulled back the curtains, dust exploding into the air, and surveyed my temporary home. The living room was filled with furniture from another era. A floral couch that had probably been fashionable in the 70s. A television with a broken screen. Stacks of newspapers and magazines covering every surface. Frank had clearly been a hoarder in his later years. I moved through the house room by room. The kitchen had ancient appliances and a sink full of dishes that had been sitting so long they'd fossilized. The bathroom had brown water stains and a toilet that didn't flush. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and another bathroom. One bedroom had clearly been Frank's. The bed was unmade. Clothes still hung in the closet. It felt like walking through a museum of someone's abandoned life. The other 2 bedrooms were crammed with boxes, old furniture, and what looked like 40 years of accumulated junk. I felt overwhelmed. How was I supposed to live here for 3 months? The place was barely habitable. I'd need to get the power turned on, the water working, and clear out mountains of trash before it would be livable. I went back downstairs and out to my truck. I sat there as the sun set, painting the Iowa sky in oranges and purples, and seriously considered just leaving. Driving back to Chicago and telling the lawyer to give the property to the state. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was curiosity about why Frank had done this. Or maybe it was the fact that, if I was honest with myself, I had nothing urgent pulling me back to Chicago. No wife, no kids, just a job and an apartment I barely spent time in. I decided to stay, at least for a while. That night, I slept in my truck with the doors locked, too creeped out to sleep in the house without power. The next morning, I drove into town. Millbrook was one of those classic small Iowa towns. A main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office, a bar, and a church. I stopped at the diner for breakfast. The moment I walked in, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at me. An older waitress with kind eyes approached. She asked if I was Frank's nephew. Word travels fast in small towns. I confirmed I was. She introduced herself as Betty and said Frank had been a good man, quiet, but good. Several other locals came over to offer condolences and welcome me. They asked if I was planning to fix up the old place. I said I wasn't sure yet. A man named Tom, who ran the hardware store, told me if I needed supplies or advice to come see him. Frank had been a regular customer until his health declined. After breakfast, I went to the county office and got the utilities transferred into my name. Power would be on by evening. Water was already working, just needed to run for a while to clear out. I spent $50 at the hardware store on cleaning supplies, trash bags, work gloves, and a heavy-duty flashlight. Tom threw in a free package of light bulbs and told me to come back if I needed anything else. Back at the house, I started the grim work of cleaning. I began with the living room. Hours of hauling out newspapers, magazines, and broken furniture, bags and bags of trash. By evening, the power came on. I flipped switches and heard the house hum to life. It felt like a small victory. I managed to clear a path to one of the upstairs bedrooms and set up an air mattress I'd bought. That night, exhausted and filthy, I collapsed into sleep. Over the next 2 weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Wake early, work on the house all day, fall into bed exhausted. Slowly, the place started to reveal itself. Under the hoard was a solid house with good bones, beautiful hardwood floors under the grime, original woodwork and built-in shelves, crown molding. Frank had let it go, but it had been something special once. I was working on the living room one afternoon, about 3 weeks in, when I decided to tackle the wallpaper. The walls were covered in this hideous floral pattern, yellowed with age and peeling in several places. I figured fresh paint would do wonders. I started in a corner using a scraper to peel away the old paper. It came off in satisfying strips. Underneath was another layer of wallpaper, older still, and under that, another. It was like peeling back layers of time. I was on the 4th or 5th layer when the scraper hit something that wasn't paper, something harder. I peeled more carefully. Underneath the layers of wallpaper, someone had drawn directly on the plaster wall. I stopped, heart suddenly pounding for reasons I didn't understand. I peeled away more wallpaper, revealing more of the drawing. It was a map, hand-drawn in faded pencil and ink, but not a map of anything I recognized. I pulled away wallpaper more frantically now, dust and shreds flying. The map covered almost the entire wall, about 6 feet by 8 feet. It showed the property. The house was marked clearly in the center, but there were other markings, symbols I didn't recognize, numbers and letters, dotted lines leading to various points on the property. One line led to the barn, another to a spot in what would be the north field. Several led to places marked with X's. At the bottom of the map, in careful handwriting I recognized from Frank's Christmas cards, was a message. It said, "For David, when you're ready, start at the beginning. Trust the land. It will tell you what you need to know. The truth is buried, but not lost. Uncle Frank." I stood there staring at that wall as the afternoon light slanted through the window. My mind raced. What was this? Some kind of treasure map? That seemed absurd. But why else would Frank hide a map under layers of wallpaper and leave me specific instructions to live here for 3 months? The message said, "Start at the beginning." I looked at the map carefully. There was a symbol near the house marked with the number 1. It appeared to be near the foundation on the east side. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside. The east side of the house was overgrown with bushes and weeds. I pushed through them, looking for anything unusual. The foundation was stone, old, and crumbling in places. I examined it carefully, running my hands along the rough surface. Then I saw it. One stone was different, newer. It had been replaced recently. Unlike the others, it was smooth, and carved into it was the same symbol from the map, a circle with a line through it. My hands shook as I tried to pry the stone loose. It was mortared in place, but not well. After a few minutes of working with a screwdriver from my tool kit, the stone came free. Behind it was a small cavity, and inside the cavity was a metal box. I pulled it out, my heart hammering. The box was old, made of tin, and locked with a simple padlock. I took it inside and spent 10 minutes finding tools to break the lock. When it finally snapped open, I lifted the lid. Inside was a letter, a small notebook, and an old photograph. The photograph showed 2 young men, probably in their 20s, standing in front of the farmhouse. I recognized one as a young Uncle Frank. The other I didn't know. I unfolded the letter, Frank's handwriting, but stronger, from years ago. It was dated 15 years back. It read, "David, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've started to figure things out. I'm sorry for the mystery, but this story needs to be told the right way. The man in the photo is my brother, your father. This was taken the summer before he left for Chicago and never came back. Before you were born, before everything changed, we were best friends. We were going to run this farm together. But something happened, something that drove him away and broke our family. The truth has been buried on this land for 40 years. I've been protecting it. Now it's your burden and your inheritance. The map will guide you. Each location holds a piece of the story. Follow them in order. By the end, you'll understand why I left this to you, why it had to be you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you when I was alive. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone and too dangerous to speak out loud. Trust the process, and forgive us if you can. Frank. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. My father had died when I was 12. I barely remembered him. He'd left when I was a baby, and my mother had raised me alone in Chicago. She'd never talked about him much. Said he was a good man who couldn't handle family responsibility. I'd accepted that story my whole life. Now Uncle Frank was telling me there was more. Something buried. Literally. I looked at the notebook. It was a journal of some kind. The first entry was dated 42 years ago. Frank's handwriting much younger. The entries were short, cryptic. References to locations, to arguments, to a growing rift between him and my father. I spent the next hour reading through the journal. It painted a picture of two brothers who'd been close until the summer of 1982. Something had happened that summer. Frank's entries became more distressed. References to what we found and what we did and can't go back now. Then an entry from August 1982. James left today. Said he can't live with it. Can't stay here. I don't blame him, but I can't leave. Someone has to protect it. Someone has to make sure it stays hidden. I'll carry this alone if I have to. James was my father's name. I sat there as darkness fell outside, the house silent around me, and tried to process what I was reading. Protect what? Hide what? What had they found on this property? The journal had sketches, rough maps similar to the one on the wall, references to locations marked with numbers. I realized Frank had been documenting something over years. The journal ended 10 years ago with a simple entry. Getting old, health failing, can't maintain this forever. David will be the one. He has to know. I looked at the map on the wall again. There were 7 marked locations, including the one I'd just found. This was location 1. I had 6 more to go, each one presumably holding another piece of whatever story Frank wanted me to uncover. I felt a mix of excitement and dread. Part of me wanted to call someone, but who? I had no family left except distant cousins I barely knew. My mother had passed 5 years ago. I was alone with this mystery. I decided I'd follow the map. What else was I going to do? I'd committed to 3 months here. Might as well spend it solving whatever puzzle my uncle had left me. The next morning, I studied the map carefully. Location 2 was marked in the barn, the collapsed barn. Great. I spent the morning making the barn safe enough to enter. It was mostly the roof that had caved in on the north side. The south side was still standing. I searched for over an hour, looking for anything matching the symbol from the map, a triangle with a dot in the center. Finally, I found it carved into one of the main support beams about 7 feet up. I got a ladder and examined the beam carefully. There was a section that looked different. Newer wood patched into old. I pried at it with a crowbar. The patch came away revealing another hollow space, another metal box. This one was larger. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings from 1982. All the articles were about the same story. A local scandal involving the county treasurer who'd embezzled money and disappeared. His name was Richard Dawson. According to the articles, over $200,000 had vanished along with him. He'd left behind a wife and 2 kids. The assumption was he'd fled to Mexico or somewhere he couldn't be extradited, but he was never found. The money was never recovered. There was also a note from Frank. This is where it started. We found something we shouldn't have. Made a choice we couldn't unmake. Location 3 will show you what we found. My mind spun. What did a missing county treasurer have to do with my father and uncle? I gathered the clippings and went to location 3. According to the map, it was in the north field about 200 yards from the house. I walked out there, spring grass up to my knees, following the old fence line Frank had drawn on the map. Location 3 was marked near an old oak tree. The symbol was carved into the tree itself, mostly grown over with bark. I searched the area around the tree. The ground looked undisturbed, but according to Frank's map, something was here. I went back for a shovel, started digging near the tree's base. About 2 feet down, I hit something solid. Not a box this time, something bigger. I dug more carefully, clearing dirt away. It was a metal container, like a large waterproof case. It took me 20 minutes to work it free and haul it to the surface. The case was locked with a combination lock, but taped to the top was another note from Frank. The combination is your father's birthday. Month, day, year. What's inside is what we found in July of 1982. We were digging a new drainage ditch near this tree. We found it buried. We should have gone to the police. We didn't. We were young and stupid and scared. We made a choice that changed everything. I knew my father's birthday, July 15th, 1955. I spun the combination. The lock clicked open. I lifted the lid. Inside the case, wrapped in plastic, was money. Stacks and stacks of cash. Old bills, hundreds and fifties, bundled together. I counted quickly. It had to be close to $50,000, maybe more. I sat back in the grass, staring at the money. This was part of the embezzled funds. It had to be. My father and uncle had found it buried on their property, and instead of reporting it, they'd kept it hidden. But why? And where was the rest? 200,000 had been stolen. This was only a fraction. I looked at the map. 4 more locations to go. I felt sick. My father had fled not because he couldn't handle responsibility. He'd fled because he was involved in hiding stolen money, because he couldn't live with what they'd done. I closed the case and dragged it back to the house. I needed to think. Inside, I opened a beer I'd bought in town and sat at the kitchen table with Frank's journal. I read more carefully now, looking for details I'd missed. There, an entry from July 1982. Found the first cash today. James wanted to report it. I convinced him to wait, to search the property first. If there's one cache, there might be more. We could keep it. No one would know. It's been underground for weeks already. Dawson is gone. The money's insured. We'd just be taking what was abandoned. Another entry from 2 weeks later. Found the second cache, then the third. James is getting cold feet, says it's wrong, says we have to tell someone. But I've been thinking. This money could save the farm. Dad's medical bills are crushing us. We could pay everything off and no one would be hurt. The insurance already paid the county back. This money is just sitting here. Then the entry from August. James told me last night he's going to the police. We had a terrible fight. I said things I regret. He said he can't be part of this. Can't live here knowing what we're hiding. He's leaving, going to Chicago, starting over. He made me promise not to contact him. Said if he never comes back, no one will connect him to any of this if it ever comes out. I'm alone now. I sat there processing. My father had wanted to do the right thing. Uncle Frank had talked him into hiding the money. Then when my father's conscience couldn't take it, he'd left. Abandoned his brother, his family, his whole life to escape the guilt. And Frank had stayed here for 40 years, guarding the secret. The map had 4 more locations. I spent the next 3 days finding them one by one. Location 4 was buried under the floorboards in the house's basement, another 50,000. Location 5 was in the foundation of the collapsed section of barn, carefully hidden in a waterproofed container, 40,000. Location 6 was at the far corner of the property line, buried under a marker stone, 60,000. Each location had a note from Frank, documenting when he'd moved the money, how he'd maintained the hiding spots over decades, and his growing regret. Finally, location 7. According to the map, it was back in the house, in the walls of the master bedroom, Frank's bedroom. I went up there and studied the walls, found the symbol carved faintly into the baseboard in the corner. I pulled the baseboard away. Behind it, the wall was hollow. I cut into the drywall carefully. Inside was the last metal box. I pulled it out. This one didn't contain money. It contained a letter, the longest one yet, and it was addressed to me specifically, dated just 6 months before Frank died. I sat on his unmade bed and read, "David, if you've made it this far, you found all the money. About $240,000 total. Dawson buried it on this property before he ran. We never figured out why here. Maybe he knew the land was isolated. Maybe he planned to come back for it and never could. We found it by accident. And I made the worst decision of my life, convincing your father to hide it instead of reporting it. That decision broke our family. Your father couldn't live with the guilt. He left and I never saw him again. He died never forgiving me, and I never forgave myself. I've lived alone here for 40 years protecting this money, and I don't even know why anymore. I couldn't spend it, couldn't report it without confessing to hiding it for decades. It became my prison. I thought about burning it, burying it deeper, but that felt like more dishonesty. So I'm leaving it to you, along with the choice I never gave your father. You can report it. Tell the authorities the whole story. The statute of limitations has probably passed on what we did. The original crime definitely has. You can do the right thing without serious consequences. Or you can keep it. Use it to fix up this property. Build a life here. The choice your father wanted to make, but I wouldn't let him. I'm giving you the freedom I denied him. Whatever you choose, you'll understand your father better now. He wasn't weak. He wasn't irresponsible. He was moral. He couldn't live with compromise. He left because he was good, not because he was bad. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I'm sorry I broke my family. I'm sorry I was a coward who let pride and fear control me. The 3 months in the will, that was to give you time to find everything, to understand, to make your choice. The land will support whatever you decide. If you stay, it's yours free and clear. If you leave, sell it with peace. Either way, you know the truth now. I hope that's worth something. Frank. I sat there as the sun set outside Frank's bedroom window, the letter in my hands, and cried. For my father who'd carried guilt his whole life. For Frank who'd been imprisoned by a choice made when he was young. For the family that had been destroyed by hidden money that no one ever spent. When I finally pulled myself together, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I drove to the county sheriff's office. I asked to speak to the sheriff, told him I had information about an old case. He was a man in his 60s named Jim Crawford. He listened as I told him the whole story, about the map, the hidden money, what Frank and my father had done. He sat back in his chair when I finished, asked me to wait. He came back with old files, sat down and went through them. Finally, he looked up at me. He said the Richard Dawson case was 42 years old. Dawson had never been found, presumed dead. The insurance company had settled with the county. Dawson's wife had died years ago. His kids were in their 50s now and had moved away. As for what Frank and my father did, he said technically they'd committed a crime by not reporting found property, but the statute of limitations was long past. There was no legal reason to pursue it. He asked what I wanted to do with the money. I said I wanted it to go where it should have gone 42 years ago, back to the county. He made calls. By the end of the day, arrangements were made. The money would be returned. It would go into the county's general fund. It would help the community. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Jim shook my hand, said Frank had been a good man who made one bad choice and paid for it his whole life, said my father had been brave to walk away, said I'd done the right thing. News spread through Millbrook within days. Suddenly, I was the talk of the town. Some people thought I was noble. Others thought I was stupid to give up that much money. Tom from the hardware store told me he respected my choice. Betty from the diner said Frank would be proud. I stayed in the house. I'd made my decision. I wasn't going back to Chicago. Over the next 2 months, I worked on restoring the farmhouse. I used my savings and a small loan. I fixed the roof, replaced windows, restored the hardwood floors. I painted walls and installed new fixtures. The house transformed. It became beautiful again, what it had been before sadness took over. I hired local contractors, used local suppliers. Word got around that I was staying. People warmed to me more. I was invited to community dinners, asked to join the volunteer fire department. Slowly, I became part of Millbrook. One afternoon, about 4 months after I'd first arrived, I was on the porch painting the railings when a truck pulled up. A man in his 50s got out. He looked at the house, at me, and I could see emotion on his face. He introduced himself as Robert Dawson, Richard Dawson's son. He'd heard about what I'd found and what I'd done. He wanted to thank me. We sat on the porch and talked. He said his father's disappearance had destroyed his childhood. Everyone had assumed his father was a criminal who'd abandoned them. They'd lived with that shame forever, learning that his father had buried the money and likely intended to return it. But something had prevented him, changed everything. It didn't excuse the theft, but it complicated the story. Made his father human rather than just a villain. Robert said he'd done research after hearing about the found money. His father had disappeared while hiking in Colorado, supposedly. His body had never been found. Robert now believed he'd died accidentally before he could come back for the money or turn himself in. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was something. Before Robert left, he thanked me again. Said what I'd done had given him peace he'd never expected to find. After he drove away, I sat on that porch and felt like I'd closed a circle that had been open for 4 decades. I called my mother's sister, my Aunt Linda, that evening. I'd been distant from her for years. I told her everything I'd learned about my father. She cried. She said my mother had never known the real reason my father left. He'd told her he just couldn't handle being a husband and father, that he was weak. My mother had believed that until she died. Linda said if she'd known the truth, it would have changed everything. She said my father had been a good man who made one mistake and spent his life running from it. She was proud of me for doing what he'd wanted to do. 6 months after I'd first arrived, the 3 months required by the will were long past. The house was restored. The land was maintained. I'd started leasing the fields to a neighboring farmer. I'd found work doing construction projects around the county. I was making a life. One evening, I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the Iowa sky in colors that still amazed me. I thought about Frank, about my father, about the choices that had shaped all our lives. That night, I went inside and stood in front of the living room wall where the map had been. I'd plastered over it and painted, but I knew what was underneath, a record of shame and secrets. I decided to do something. I carefully sketched out the map on a piece of paper, copying it from memory and photos I'd taken. Then I wrote out the whole story, everything that had happened. I put it in an envelope along with copies of Frank's letters and the journal. I addressed it to Robert Dawson, sent it to him with a note saying this was his family's story too. He had a right to it. A week later, Robert called. He said the map and the story meant more than he could express. He asked if he could come visit the property, bring his sister, see where their father had been. I said yes. They came the following Saturday. We walked the property. I showed them the locations marked on the map, the old oak tree where the first cash had been buried, the places Frank had hidden the money over decades. Robert's sister, Patricia, was quiet most of the time, but at the oak tree, she put her hand on the bark and cried. She said her father used to take them for walks in fields like this when she was little, before everything fell apart. They thanked me for giving them this closure. We stayed in touch. Over the next year, I continued restoring the farm. I fixed up the barn, brought in some cattle, started actually farming the land instead of just leasing it. It was hard work. I'd never been a farmer, but Tom and other neighbors helped me learn. I became part of the community in a way I'd never been part of anything in Chicago. I dated a woman named Sarah who taught at the local school. We took things slow, but it felt real in a way nothing had before. One day, almost exactly a year after Frank had died, I was moving some old boards in the barn when I found one more thing. Carved into a beam near the floor, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, was a message. Frank's handwriting. If you're reading this, you stayed. I'm glad. This land needed someone who would love it. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. F. I sat there in the dusty barn and felt Frank's presence. Felt like maybe he could finally rest. That night, I added one more entry to Frank's old journal. I'd kept it, along with all the letters and documents. My entry read, I understand now why you left this to me. Not because I deserved it, but because you knew I'd need it. I was lost in Chicago, going through motions. No real connections. No purpose. You gave me a mystery that led to a home. Thank you, Uncle Frank. Thank you, Dad. Your mistakes led to my second chance. I hope you've both found peace. I finally have. David. I closed the journal and put it on a shelf. Someday maybe I'd have kids. I'd tell them this story. About the uncle who hid a secret and the father who couldn't live with it. About choices and consequences. About how sometimes the worst things lead to the best things if you're willing to walk through them. I never regretted returning the money. Never regretted staying in Millbrook. Never regretted following that map under the wallpaper. It led me exactly where I needed to be. Home.